we should get going. Okay, folks, we're going to start this morning's proceedings. I must just explain to you my situation where I am. I'm teaching at Redham House in Waterfall. So I'm sitting in a classroom and I've linked my computer to the large screen on the wall. And when I look up and I roll my eyes and I look up to my left, I'm not rolling my eyes at anything that the presenters have said. All I'm doing is I'm turning to look at the array of little pictures that I've got up there to see who is speaking, to see who is here, and so on. So I'm not being rude, is what I'm trying to say. Now, today's session, we have a session which one might say is a session of reflections and recollections. First of all, the previous session we had, we did something quite unusual. I think that was back in, was it October, August? August, was it, Benta? One loses track, especially in these crazy locked up times. But we spoke about opportunities and difficulties, but we spoke about online teaching. I'm not sure how long I was muted for. I didn't mute myself. It just seemed to happen by itself. Maybe I bumped the mouse. Anyway, I'm not going to try and repeat everything I said, because it's not that important. But perhaps the important part is to say that we are reflecting, first of all, on what we spoke about last time. And we're going to ask Takalani Siala to lead us in that and give a few of her own thoughts. And then I'll give some time for anybody who would like to raise issues of their own. But this is not a long discussion. It's really not issues, it's points. Things that have occurred to you perhaps since hearing the previous community of practice session, perhaps experiences that you've had subsequent to that, and any points just on this whole online thing, whether it does the job properly, whether it does it better than we were doing it before, which I think would be a bit of an indictment if that was the case. And then when we finish that, we will go straight into our discussion with Tracy Butchart. I will introduce her briefly when the time comes. But for those of you that heard her speaking last year at, I think it was RMB, we were speaking at RMB, and we were still in the good old days when we could actually play in front of a crowd. And so there was a very good turnout for that, and we heard her researches to that point. Well, she's had a lot of very good opportunity, especially with lockdown now, to extend that work. And so we're going to hear where she is now in her thinking. And for those of you who haven't heard her before, you're in for a treat. So with all of that, I just have one little announcement to make, which Benta sent to me. And let me read it to you. When the meeting starts, please remind people, that's all of you, to write their names and the organizations they come from in the chat box. This is a kind of attendance register. It makes it easier for us to know who's in the meeting, because some people use anonymous Zoom names. So please don't be anonymous. Please get into the chat box there and tell us who you are and what organization. So Eugene Pelteret from Reflective Learning, he's just obeyed like a good chap, and I hope the rest of you will do it as well. Okay, so while that is happening, let's ask Takalani to give us some reflections on the session we had last time and anything that might have occurred to her subsequent to that. Takalani. Takalani? Okay. Here we go. Let's see what.
I'm here.
Are you here? Okay. Takalani, did you hear that introduction?
I think I did.
Well, we'll know soon enough whether you did or you didn't, whether you obey me or not, but you've never obeyed me before, so why start now? Okay, Takalani,
Okay.
over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to give you the reflection on online learning or online schooling as we were doing it over the lockdown. We have heard from the learners already as to what their experiences were during online learning. Today is just gonna be from me as a teacher. My name is Takarani Siara and I teach at Dominican Convent School in Belgravia. As the head of department here, when the lockdown came, we all had to quickly, as it was for all other schools as well, to move quickly into this new kind of learning, which is the online learning. So while we were busy exploring this online learning, I realized that there were also lots of things that we didn't know as teachers. I don't think it's only from me. It can also be from you as well who went online during the lockdown. And my experiences is what I'm going to share with you today. They may be similar to yours, or if there's something that I left out, you can also add so that we can have a bank of all the challenges or all the ticks that we can tick after this presentation. So while we were doing this, first of all, we had to get the contact details of the learners. So getting hold of all your learners was also a challenge, as most of them did not have the cell phones. So if a learner does not have a cell phone, it was very difficult to get hold of that learner so that the learner can be part of the classroom. This happened so quickly before we could even say to the learners in our classroom, oh, can I have your cell phone? Or you get hold of one learner, then you start asking around, do you have the cell phone number of this one or that one or that one? And as a teacher already, I think by then, the first call was going to be our class registers. So it was very important for us on lockdown, who didn't even think of scratching or taking your MacBook home or something like that, to go online and get the class register. If you don't have a printer at home, that meant that you wouldn't even print that class register. So that meant that you have to find other alternatives of getting the class register so that you can be able to check if you can get hold of all the learners. Once you do that, I realized that we take things for granted in such a way that there were some learners who had school email addresses, but those email addresses were not activated. So it's either the learner will say, okay, I do have an email address, but I don't have my password, something like that. That meant that you have, as a teacher, you have to go back to the admin, try to sort out the email addresses for their school emails, or ask the learners to also give you their personal email addresses. If they give you their personal email addresses, the challenges are, they are going to give you a name like zoniz@gmail.com. When you are working with zoniz@gmail.com, you don't have their names. So you don't know who to tick on the register as well. So those were the challenges that we had at the beginning of starting this online learning. Once we get hold of all the learners now, let's say now we have the class is running, then there was the technology part of this learning. And then I'm also an academic. I'm doing my master's with vets. So I also quickly realized that here is a gap. This is something that I can do. So I checked that, and I will tell you more about it after I have gone through what I went through with online learning. So once you get the learners connected to whatever platform you choose for them, which for us at Dominican Convent, we were using Teams. I was learning it for the first time. I was knowing it for the first time as well. I had to teach the learners how Teams work as quickly as possible. So that meant that the first 2 days or 2-3 days, I was busy just learning the program myself and getting the learners to learn the program with me, using their data as well. Some of them complaining we are online for too long. What about our data? Something like that. So we had to learn the program very quickly so that if a learner gets stuck on the program, it does not interfere with the maths that you are trying to teach. So as teachers, we had to learn this very quickly so that we are experts of this program that we are choosing to use, so that we can be able to help the kids as they log in and starting to learn for the first time online. As it was happening at the beginning of this session as well, the mute button, you talk and you talk and you talk and no one can hear you and the kids don't know what to do. They are online, they are looking at you and you also don't know why they are not responding. And you as a teacher, you are on mute for 3, 4, 5 minutes. So learning those small bits and pieces of work that you have to do with technology, that was part of the biggest stumbling block. Also, as you are talking to them, you can't see anyone. You have told the learners, all of them, they need to mute their mics because you don't want to hear their backgrounds or whoever is singing on the background or the dog barking or something like that. So the minute you start asking them questions, they will answer, but they are on mute. So that is something that we had to learn very quickly and also create a classroom culture immediately where you have to work around that. So those are the rules to say, if you want to say something, check if you are on mute, unmute yourself, and then say what you want to say. All of them wants to be on videos as well. They want to see you. So everyone wants to be seen, or they want to see their friends. And the minute everyone else is on video, the network or the signals becomes bad. They can't see who is presenting anymore. They want to see each other. So something like that has to be worked on earlier on before it was too late to say, okay, your screens should be on mute. You shouldn't be on video. You shouldn't start any video because otherwise it interferes with the network if all of us are on video at the same time. So those are the things that no one will have taught you and no one is gonna teach you. It's something that you learn as you are going. So the last time I was talking about pedagogy. That is something that as a teacher, a lot of things will happen on your feet. Like for myself, I had to use 3 screens. I have to have a screen which they will pin on their screens as well so that they can see what I'm writing. So I was using an iPad as my board. I used my cell phone for class register so that as they come in, I know who is there and who is not there. And again, going back to the class register, tick who is there and who is not there. I had a class of 57 learners, and to get 57 learners, all of them at the same time, it took me a while. So I had to quickly on my cell phone check who is attending so that I can quickly check the register, which at first I was calling out their names and it was taking me like 10-15 minutes just to do the register. So then that's when I decided, okay, let me have another screen just for registers, another screen where they will see what I'm writing, another screen now for their messages, because I cannot have their messages and check the register and teach for them to see my screen at the same time using one device. So I had to move between those 3 devices. And as the lessons were progressing, I then had to give them work to do at home. when you give them work to do at home, let's say it's a homework of 2 or 3 problems, whatever the number of problems you will want them to practice, all of them, they were sending them via WhatsApp. So that meant that my phone was very busy. So they were sending work at any time of the day. If my lesson is tomorrow at 9 o'clock, between my now and when my lesson starts the next day, I will be receiving messages at random times until I came up with the idea that, okay, let's do this. The homework I'm giving you now, it has to be sent by 5 o'clock in the evening, for instance. That means at 5 o'clock, it is my cutting time. Then I will check who have submitted the work, and then I will start marking as they submit the work. Because it is on WhatsApp, they expect live response, like response should be now, because otherwise they lose interest. So giving them time to say, okay, by this time your homework has to be in, that gave me time not to look at my phone up until that time. Then I know at 5 o'clock I'm going to be marking grade 12 maths. Then I give myself an hour to sit on the phone and mark and respond. You mark and give feedback. So, and as you mark and you give feedback to a learner, immediately when you give the feedback to the learner comes back with another message to say, okay, I don't quite understand what you're saying here. So that kind of interaction, it became a tug of war between me and the learners now. I have 10 responses from the learners. I have to attend to all of them. So what I quickly did was to say, if I give you homework and you submit it and I give you back feedback, what we are going to do is to have another session, which is going to be a homework session feedback, where you have all of them at the same time online, and then you can address those queries at the same time, instead of responding back to each learner, which for me was taking a very, very long time. The other thing which came up when we were doing this.
Takalani,
yes.
could I suggest we make it another 5 minutes of input? Is that enough time for you?
Yes, that will be enough time, Peter.
Fine, okay.
Yes, thank you, Peter. Okay, I was still talking about an alternative slot to do homework, and then having all of them at the same time, and then giving them feedback at the same time. And then that interaction started happening. And also the other thing that I did amongst them was that once they send me their homework, I will then say to them, if someone have done it correctly, I will say to the one who have not done it correctly, communicate with this person, so that that communication amongst them can start happening, so that when they have a problem with a question, they don't come to me as the end person. They can start communicating that problem with each other, and then when 3, 4, 5 of them have gone through the process and they are finding that they are not getting anywhere, then they can seek further help from me. Otherwise, it was becoming very overwhelming to get all these messages at the same time. And as one teacher, you have to attend to 57 learners.
I'm trying to put something in so that it doesn't come through to you, Rena. Somehow when I put just listening to this webinar, and I'm trying to put earphones.
I don't think she is with us. Is she aware she's online?
I'm trying to sort myself out. Sorry.
Okay, also just what happened now, it will happen in the classroom. When you have 57 learners online, things like this will happen, and then it distracts the lesson, and then you have to quickly work around that to say, okay, forget about that. This is what we're doing now. So besides the disturbances that you will get throughout the lesson, on a daily basis, you will not get the exact number that you wish to have for a lesson. So that meant that for each lesson that you will schedule with a class, you will then make an alternative lesson as well to redo what you have done. Reason being, some learners will come online and they will not hear you clearly. Some learners will be online and they cannot see your screen. Some learners will be online, but something will be happening on their side. Some learners will tell you that at this time, the data was off or my computer was not connecting. So we had to quickly put that into consideration as well. So that if you run a lesson, for instance, if you're doing functions, let's say you're doing quadratic functions, you make sure that you repeat that very same lesson at an alternative time. And then ticking the register as well was the most important key, because you need to end up knowing if I offer a lesson and then I offer an alternative lesson, which learner did not connect. If you don't know who did not connect, the following day when they come in, you have learners who connected yesterday, you have learners who did not connect a day before. So there was that discontinuity that will happen. So at the end, towards the end, what I did, I managed to pick who will connect at this time and who will connect at a later time and who will connect on the third time. So I had to offer those classes in such a way that I ended up dividing my 57 into 3 classes. So I will offer a class for a group of learners who were connecting at a certain time, and then a group of learners who will connect at another time, so that I know at this time, if so and so does not connect, then I am able to send that person a message. What happened? Will you be able to connect the next class? So that those others who have connected do not come in again. So what I have done as well is my 5 minute over.
It's just about over. What I would like, I mean, we're getting a lot on the administration of it, and the way that you managed your way around that, I think, is quite heroic. You must have worked yourself into the ground doing what you did. I would just like you to make 1 or 2 quick comments on the actual learning and the effectiveness of the learning. I don't think it can be as good as face-to-face, but did you have any little wins where you reckon this was working particularly well?
Yes, I will say yes. What was working particularly well for a teacher, which would not have happened if it was face-to-face, was the accuracy of checking homework. Because once you teach and they send you work back, that personal feedback to the learners, that wouldn't happen in a normal class. Usually, you will just stand in front of the class and transmit, which in this case, you go into their space and they know it's them and you, and then you can work around the misunderstandings that they have. That worked really well.
That came at a cost, though, and the cost would have been the amount of energy you had to put into it.
The amount of time that I had to be on the screen as well, on my phone.
Yeah.
Which increased a lot.
Wow, I can imagine. Dr. Lani, one other thing I'd like to ask you. My experience was that a lot of the kids preferred to have the video off. They liked the anonymity. Perhaps they were playing computer games or making coffee and just not telling me. And I battled to get kids to connect and so that I could see them. And you said that right from the word go, you made that the default position, and the kids were quite happy with it. Is that what you said?
Yes. So remember, on my other screen, I have my register. I can see who have connected.
Yeah.
So to keep them seated on their chairs, because I knew that they will go and make coffee and then come back, I will ask a question at random. So from my list, I know who is in class. So when I ask a question, I just pick a person and that person should respond.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, look, I think you learned very quickly what sort of strategies were necessary, and I'm in awe of the effort that you've put in. Just let's pause there for one brief moment and just see if there are any comments, or let's make them extremely quick questions that anybody has to ask, or comments just to throw into the pot. All right, maybe those things will come through later. Not much more to ask, but the way that you organize things to give yourself that close space, and as you say, get into their space, and to force them to take to respond with the homework you'd asked them to do, I think you might have got onto something very quickly there that was very useful. I certainly didn't, and I can see it now that the kids are back at school, that there was that gap in what they got during the lockdown. So, Takalani, any final comments from you of a broad nature about this game that we're learning to play now?
What I have done, what I am doing currently with my online learning, because I have put a lot of effort into it. I'm studying it at university now. My thesis is gonna be on online learning. I'm looking at technological pedagogical content knowledge as my study for this year. So I don't want that to go into waste. So what I'm doing, when a learner is absent from school, I connect the learner
Victor, please
in class, and that learner can still be in a maths class when they are wherever they are. So that is what I'm doing, so that I don't lose everything that I have done during the lockdown.
Well, thanks very much, and it'll be interesting to see now you turning this well-known pedagogical content knowledge into technological content knowledge as well, creating a new form of knowledge here that teachers are going to have to get used to.
It's very interesting as well.
Okay. Well, listen, Takalani, we'll keep track of you, and when you can come and tell us something about technological content knowledge.
TPEG, call it TPEG, Peter.
Oh, okay. All of these new acronyms start getting confusing, but it's worth us keeping contact with you and for you to feed back on that, because I'm sure there are a lot of people that would be interested in what you're saying and what you find out during your researches. Takalani, if you don't mind, I think we should end it there. There weren't too many comments or questions forthcoming, so we'll stop it there. But I do think we will keep a careful eye on what you're doing, and certainly get you back sometime in the future to talk a little bit more about the things you're finding out. So thank you very much. Takalani? Okay.
Thank you, Peter. I was on mute already.
You were on mute already. What a good girl you are. Thank you, Takalani. Okay, folks. Yes. Okay. Takalani's off. Okay. Here we go. We're now moving on. I found that very interesting, just because I've been through the same thing, and I think she solved some of her problems a lot better than I did. Where we're going now is to move over to the main speaker of the day, the main presenter, which is Tracy Butchart. Now, Tracy very kindly sent us 2 bios. The one bio was a short one for Peter, because he has a very short attention span and he can't read long things. But what I will ask Bente to do is to put the longer bio into the report. Bente and Margie Forwak will we'll sort that out and put the longer bio into the report on the session. But just let me give you the short one. Tracy started out teaching maths and science, but the inequality in the South African education system soon inspired her to look for ways of broadening access to vital subjects and what can be more vital than our subjects of maths and science, and also to try and raise the levels of achievement in these so-called difficult subjects. So using what she called, and she will explain a bit more, and you'll pick this up in her presentation, transformative assessment, assessment that transforms, which I should think all assessment should do, and also something called the metacognitive approach to learning, and that she will talk about. Tracy takes these starting points, and she focuses on fast-tracking catch-up of learning backlogs in maths and science. Now, I think that most of her chat today will be on maths, and we all know, if we've taught any maths, that there are certain things that kids just don't get. And if they aren't remediated soon, they tend to compound their effect. So when you have a particular misconception for a couple of years, everything that you've learned in between the time you got the conception and now has been tainted by not knowing that. And therefore, it's very important to identify these things early. But what Tracy is doing is to find out what it is and then to remediate it whenever it is found. And that's what she'll be talking about. She's doing a PhD and turning all of this into a PhD at WITS. And at the moment, she's the Director of Research and Learning Design for the organization, her organization called Reflective Learning. And I believe she's probably talking to us from Hermanus, which is a really tough thing to have to do. Okay, Tracy, welcome. Thank you very much for being with us. We look forward to hearing what you've got to say. It's over to you.
Thank you so much, Peter, for the opportunity. And I have to tell you, Hermanus today is grey and rainy, so not probably an ideal place to be. I would like to, I'm just going to share my screen. And sorry, there we go. Can you see? And I would like to just talk briefly about backlogs. And as you've said already, my focus is really on this metacognitive approach to catching them up. And I'll talk a bit more about that a little later. But just to start off, sorry, I'm just, my technology. I can't move my slide on. Sorry, I'm just, yeah. I need to actually access my slide at the moment. It's Zoom is covering my screen. I'm sorry to be struggling with the technology.
Don't stress. We're quite happy to give you a minute or two to get it.
I'm not sure why my Zoom options at the bottom are not popping up so that I can actually launch.
Are you on full screen?
I'm on full screen, and I'm trying to get out of full screen so that I can get to my PowerPoint presentation, which you can see.
Tracy, just check at the top. Check at the top of your screen. There's view options. Click on it.
I don't have view options on my. Oh, here. Sorry.
Go.
Oh. I seem to just be able to hide video here.
Hey, Tracy.
I did practice this beforehand, so very frustrating that I think I need to stop sharing my screen.
Tracy,
and then,
Tracy.
yeah. I'm listening.
Tracy, would you like just to talk to us for a while without the screen and
I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and just go back to Zoom and minimize it, and then try like that. I'm sorry. I'm just going to try it like this, and let's see if I can share my screen again. And now I have an option to share my screen. Yes. I actually have my colleague, I can't see it though. Oh, very frustrating. My colleague Eugene is online too. And I know that he would be able to solve this in 2 ticks. I don't know
Eugene,
if it's...
do you want to talk us through it?
Maybe if you want to just try share your screen again there, Tracy.
I want to share my PowerPoint slideshow, but when I share the screen, I can't access the PowerPoint slideshow.
Just, yeah, so when you go, it's probably automatically going into full screen.
So maybe, yeah, so maybe I should share that screen. Let me share my Zoom screen. And then I'm back here again.
Can you, and now, is it full screen again?
Yeah, I've got I've got control over it. Thank you.
Go.
Don't know what happened, but should I minimize this? Or let's move this up a bit. There we go.
Well, you do whatever you like now that you know how to do it.
Let's hope. Okay, so I think this is a picture that we are all too familiar with, and as we head into exam season again, is this what we're going to face? I'm sorry to have to say that sadly it is what we are going to face, and it's not necessarily because of COVID-19 pandemic. You know, last year, only 10% of the 2019 grade 12 cohort passed maths with 50% or more. And now we have COVID adding to that picture. So why is it? Well, Lucy are asking the same question. Why every year do we have the same story with our maths results? We are showing improvement in other subjects, but in maths we just don't seem to be able to do so. So this picture, this little graph, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with it, but it's interesting that as long ago as 1989, Nick Taylor was drawing attention to learning backlogs. He published a paper called Falling at the First Hurdle. But in 2015, we gained insight into the extent of the problem when Nick Spall and Janli Kotze published this paper. They were able to measure the gap between the actual grade that learners were in and the effective grades of learners, the grade that learners were functioning at. And through an analysis of standardized maths tests, they were able to track learners through the system from grade 3 to grade 9. And in measuring that learning backlog, which they called a learning deficit, they were able to show that 84%, you can see here, of grade 3 learners were not at grade 3 level. And worryingly, 60% of them were in fact 3 years behind. They'd been at school just for 3 years and they were 3 years behind. And that backlog grows here to 4 years behind by the time they're in grade 9. And I've sensitively touched my touchpad and moved on to the next screen. But this is very interesting data that we have collected through our work at Reflective Learning. The reason why this data is most interesting is that it's it was a randomized sample of learners. So these were not learners that came to reflective learning to do our diagnostics, to identify gaps in maths because they struggled with maths. This was a randomized sample for an NGO working in KZN who wanted to get an idea of what the state of maths education was. And 25 learners in each grade at 23 schools were computer generated. Their names were computer generated, and they did the reflective learning diagnostic. And what was really interesting for us to see was a confirmation of Spall and Kotz's research that actually the grade 8s and the grade 9s are 4 years behind the actual grade that they're in. But interestingly, we were able to extend it then, this picture, through to the higher grades, and a really interesting piece of learning came out of it. The grade 10s, still 4 years behind, you can see, but look at the grade 11s, 5 years behind, and the grade 12s, 6 years behind. And so that sheds light now on the challenge that we face with our grade 12s and their final exam results. Imagine being in grade 12, being taught grade 12 maths, but actually your level of competence is grade 6 level. And it's most interesting for me to see that grade 6 is a threshold, because all of these grades could not get past grade 6 level. So something is not happening there, that learners are able to progress beyond this. So this makes sense of the poor performance that we have in grade 12. So how do these learners in grade 12 cope? Well, they rely on a strategy of practicing exam questions. They go through past paper exams and questions. They learn to recognize the question type, and they apply a rote-learned procedure to generate answers. They don't actually learn the maths. So we can see this in this very disturbing data that came out of UCT at the end of last year. Professor Sue Ellen Shea did an analysis of the Maths 1 results at UCT. And she compared those results with the results that learners came into first year university with. And she found that those learners who'd achieved a distinction between 80 and 89% achieved an average of 47% in first year maths. That's not even a pass. And it's only learners that are getting over 90% for maths that are achieving passing at university, and passing with a 64% average. So that calls into question actually the quality of our maths results as well. Just remember also that only 44% of the 2019 cohort did maths, and only 2% of those achieved more than 80% for maths, and that's reflected there in not even being able to pass at university. So clearly we have a deep and insidious problem with maths. So last year, I had the privilege of actually speaking at one of these Maths and Science Community of Practice meetings, and I told a very long story about a program that I was involved in Mpumalanga. And this is a story of hope that we are trying to take forward through reflective learning. And just for those people who didn't hear the story, I'm going to give the briefest of overviews, but basically we had 50 learners from an impoverished community in Mpumalanga. It was a donor-funded maths enrichment program, and I was working as a consultant responsible for the monitoring and evaluation of it. And in 2011, the ANA results in Mpumalanga had shown that 80% of the grade 3 and the grade 6 learners had achieved the lowest result, which was actually not achieved, was the result on those ANAs. So I designed a diagnostic measure for our baseline that was measuring proficiency of learners at grade 3, grade 6, and grade 9 level, so that if there were gaps in their learning, that we would be aware of them and be able to make a plan to remediate them. Unfortunately, our fears were confirmed, and they were worse than we had expected. The highest performing learners were only at grade 6 level. Not surprising when I look back now from the later learnings we've had. But some of the learners were even functioning below grade 3 level. And yet they were in grade 10 and they were studying maths. They had chosen to study maths. So I stepped into an emergency position of trying to catch them up as quickly as possible while the grade level program was happening concurrently. And if you look at this graph, you can see their initial baseline results shown in the pale yellow. And you can see that actually the highest learner sitting over here, just around grade 6 level, and the lowest achieving learner here at around grade 2 level, and these learners not even at grade 3 level. And so I worked with them in developing this metacognitive approach, actually, it turns out, through what I did with them, for a period of 4 school terms. So equivalent to 1 school year, they were able to catch up between 3 and 6 grades in terms of backlogs. And it was through an approach really where they were taught to analyze their own understanding, to increase their own knowledge and drive their own learning progress. But my learning for that was still to come. And that was my big learning. Actually, there was sustained success of these learners, even greater than the initial success. So this is 2020 now, and these are 3 of those learners. Nicholas is a pharmacist now. Lindeni is a civil engineer. And Mankoba is a maths teacher. In fact, he's one of 12 learners from this program, this Alpha E program, who received ISASA bursaries and have graduated as teachers, and 8 of them are specializing in teaching maths. So I was inspired by their success and the learning over time of their continued success. And so the big question was, how could we scale this? I'm going to actually hand over to my colleague, Eugene, who's going to demonstrate how we took what I did with those 50 learners and have created a digital version of it through technology in pursuit of replicating those improvements. I'm going to stop sharing, Eugene.
Thanks, Tracy.
There we go.
So yeah, as Tracy has her mind into the pedagogy and developing content and everything else for us in terms of reflective learning, myself and my other colleague Alex, who's also on the call, we sit very much in terms of actually interacting with schools, interacting with organizations, and kind of bridging the process to say this is how we have actually put forward reflective learning and to take it to scale, as Tracy was saying. So I'm going to spend some time just showing the system and different facets of it, as well as some of the results that we've seen come from it from a usage of tech perspective. And I think this is quite interesting because especially now with COVID, there's been more and more question around, how do we help, catch up what we assume there are backlogs in the COVID time. But in many ways, it's, as you've seen, it started a long time before that. So before, so over the last week, we had a few participants from the group that are in here actually run through some assessments with reflective learning. And I'm going to show just some of the results. Obviously, as part of the process, they would have got things wrong on purpose, so we can actually see some of the results of that. But I'll show those results in a moment. But in essence, what we've tried to do is to try and stay pure to Tracy's original intervention as much as possible in the pedagogy, so that we're using technology to surround a learning process which we know works, as opposed to the other way around, where we're saying, how do we adapt technology for education? And so I think that's quite critical in terms of the perspective that we've taken. So in essence, the steps that Tracy mentioned of taking an assessment, actually you know, getting hold of the results and understanding them, which you'll expand on a little bit later, doing the catch-up and what that looks like, and then being reassessed to understand how you've improved over time, is in essence the 4 major steps of the process. So I'm just going to take us through it, and I'm going to go through it as quickly as possible, because I'm sure that Tracy would like to share a whole lot more and also give chance for question and answers. So so I'm going to just whiz through it. And just to say, you know, right from the start, if you do want to continue the conversation, take it forward, I'll drop my details at the end and you can get hold of me, which would be great. So there are the 7 learning trajectories that Tracy has outlined that learners would pick to start an assessment. You can see that I've started fractions and I'm about 3/4 of the way through. So I'm going to click on that and keep going. There is some framing and some important sort of guidelines to the assessment. This is not a summative assessment. This is very much a support learning tool. So, so even though it's done under exam conditions, it's actually a low stakes assessment, which is really important. And part of that is that there isn't any time limit. So learners work at their natural speed. We actually measure their speed so that we are able to get an extra sense of, you know, what is their pace like in terms of working through maths. But we don't want them to fear coming in. We don't want them to guess. So they actually, there's an opportunity to say, I don't know all the way through, which is perfectly fine if they don't know. It's better than getting something correct accidentally and then masking a gap. All the way through, we have an answering keyboard that they can use to actually put in things like remainders and fractions and exponents. So that's a nice thing to be able to do. So it's a kind of a mix of that and multiple choice all the way through. And then I'm going to come back to this toward the end, but to say that we're not just measuring conceptual understanding of maths, we're also measuring what we call learning behaviors. And I'm sure Tracy will expand more on that after I've finished. So each one of these questions are set up in a simple to understand way, but very much targeting a specific concept at a specific level. And so a learner can go through it just one at a time, obviously. And just because I've done this demo so many times, I'm just throwing in a few answers. And then I'm going to skip toward the end. So after I've submitted, it now does an automatic marking process. So Takalani spoke earlier a lot about, you know, understanding, you know, how to deal with kids and the administration behind it and just how much time it can take. Obviously, we've tried to streamline that whole process. This, in Tracy's original intervention, took hours and hours to mark, and for a single kid, you know. This is now all automated, so all the marking is automatically done. And then we head into the results section. There's a bit of a video that just frames the results a bit. And then it gives the level at which a learner is sitting. So for us as teachers, we would interpret this as actually a learner being at grade 4 level, but they're sitting in grade 9. For the learner, we just try to make it a little bit more vague, but in essence, you can see that they're 5 years behind in this case. But at the same time, we want them to come away feeling encouraged and that they are strengths. There's always strengths to build off of. And so in essence, you know, a learner earns a star for every concept they master. We're testing 20 concepts in this fractions assessment, and I've mastered 9 of them. And the whole aim is that I accumulate enough stars that I master the thread of learning of fractions as a whole, and then I would earn a crown. And so the big aim for the learners across all 7 learning trajectories is to earn these 7 crowns to actually show that they're up to grade level of where they need to be. Okay, that's interesting. So I've just run into my own block. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and just quickly sort that out. But I think the point of the assessment, like Tracy is showing, is to really be able to identify which concepts a learner is struggling on, and which ones have they already mastered, because out of that, we're then able to actually customize content for them and meet them at the place where they're at, versus another learner that might have mastered that particular concept. So as they go through the assessment, it's obviously picking up those points. So if you just give me one moment, I'm going to just reshare my screen. So once a learner has finished the assessment and the process has obviously marked them, and then they have received their initial results, it then moves on to the catch-up process. And for us, it's really important not just that learners get the content that they need, but they understand the bigger structure of math. So Tracy in a previous talk mentioned, the conceptual threads that are showing how one concept builds toward another. And so that's in essence what we put out through these learning maps for learners. So this is the most foundational concept of comparing common fractions. And then from there, it builds up. And so this in essence does 2 things. One, provides a structure for learners to understand how maths is put together. I know when I was at school, we did maths and we went from lesson to lesson, but I didn't actually understand how, different components of it and how it's put together. It was just maths. And so that's the first part. But the second part, also really importantly, is that in the realm of catch-up, it directs which concept we ought to be dealing with first. So typically, if a learner, does an assessment and then moves on to something, if they get to choose, they're either going to choose something which is likely either too difficult for them, there are other concepts that they haven't mastered yet first, which they've built for that, or they pick something which they feel very confident in and they feel very happy with to boost their confidence. And that's not helpful. The point is to find yourself at the place where you're able to grow that next step of development. And so each one of these circles actually represents the results for the assessment that's just been done. And I'll go into detail for that in a moment. So you can see that I've earned my 9 stars. I need another 6 in order to win the crown, to kind of show my mastery on fractions. And then I can go explore my learning behaviors. And I'm just going to click here to show. So the 6 learning behaviors that we measure are perseverance, precision. Do I make careless errors along the way? What is my pace? Maybe I'm rushing. Maybe I'm going too slow for standardized school assessment. Mindset, that's both positive and negative, or fixed and growth mindset. My level of intrinsic motivation, and then metacognition, which is Tracy's original scale that she's built. So those, if I click on any one, we'll go into more detail about those. So it's trying to give a holistic understanding of the learners. And in essence, this would be the first place for a learner to start. You can see it pulsing. And so I start by clicking on that. It gives me some detailed feedback around what I'm unable to do and why I'm at level 6 in this case, and not at level 9, where I ought to be as a grade 9 learner. And then we move onto the catch-up process. And it starts by not just jumping into content, but as Tracy will explain later, learners actually analyzing the result. So I won't go into why, she can share later. But in essence, each one of those circles that I was showing shows a different grade level that they're being assessed. And the colors show whether I've mastered that level or not. So green means I've mastered it, red means that I haven't, and yellow means that I've made a careless mistake. So in essence, I can right from the start over here say, well, that's grade 3 level because it's the innermost circle. So that's level 3. And because it's green, it means I've mastered it. The next is grade 6 level, or level 6 to the learner. And that means, because it's green, it means they've mastered it. and the outer one is level 9 or grade 9. And because it's red, it means they haven't mastered. So really the first point is to try and get them to understand that there is a gap that they have, that this is what they need to be able to accomplish by the end of this module, and gives direction to it. And then they move into the catch-up process. And so there are different components to the catch-up, but to say overall, we've taken a stance of saying the most crucial need for us to do is to build a conceptual understanding of learners, not the fluency component. So that comes thereafter. And we find like there are many programs that focus heavily on that. We want to focus on conceptual understanding because that's in fact the teaching that was missed from previous years. So it starts by looking at an introduction. Why do I need to be able to compare fractions? I suppose a typical learner sort of question, why? And then also giving the base vocabulary that's needed. So, things like fraction, and numerator, denominator, but to say that all the way through it, we're giving multiple strategies and views of the same concept so that learners can understand it in multiple different ways. Or if they only pick up one of the ways, they're still able to move forward in terms of their knowledge. So there's the introduction, and I'm just going to click through that. This one's a bit longer because fractions is a massive sinkhole, we find. I'll show you that a bit later. And then it moves on to the personalization kind of component. So if I've mastered those first 2 rings, which is effectively up to level 6, I need level 7 to 9, which is grade 7 to 9 as my catch-up. A different learner may have mastered everything, which is the case, they don't need this phase of catch-up. Another one may need to go right back to grade 1. And I think that's the very scary thing. So we've seen often where learners have to go right back to grade 1 to build up their understanding for particular concepts. And nowhere does that content exist to say, first of all, where do you need to go back to? And then how do we actually do that?
Just hold it there, Eugene. Sorry, just hold it there. Somebody's got their mic on. I wonder if, and we're picking up their background. Could you please turn off your mic? Sorry, Eugene, carry on.
Thank you, perfect. So this becomes personalized to the learner. So I'm just going to scroll through quickly, but to say that we've tried to build it in as much imagery and make it as simple as possible in terms of the learning process. At the same time, what we've also had to do is balance the need, as Takalani was talking about earlier, in terms of connectivity and bandwidth and data cost, which is a very real issue. As soon as you throw in video content, it becomes a problem. And so we've actually built this out extremely data light, so that, let's say worst case scenario, you're sitting in grade 9 and you literally got everything wrong and you need to catch up from grade 1 to 9 on every concept. It's a max of 150 megs. And so it's extremely data light from that perspective, and makes it easier for accessibility. So once a learner has gone through the catch-up, we don't want to just assume that they know it. We actually pose reflective questions for them to understand actually what are the different points of success needed, as or success criteria. And so if the answer is yes, I can use mathematical symbols greater than, equal to, less than to compare fractions. I move to the next question. If it's no, then it actually takes me back to that piece of content that was covered with that, and then I can jump forward again to continue the process. And so hopefully by the end, I actually feel confident about this. So it's about working through it slowly and thoroughly to understand the content. There's also some puzzle questions that are downloadable in a worksheet style, both the questions and the answers. And again, those testing, it's not so much testing, but it's reinforcing the core understanding component. It's not necessarily building the fluency. So after I've now finished this particular part of catch-up, I now just have one final or two final things at the end of each concept. The first is a final thought, which now takes comparing common fractions and tries to bring it into relevance within the world. And again, trying to connect it to something beyond the classroom. And then the last part for each concept is an inspiring story. Again, that holistic feel of trying to help learners with their motivation and their mindset. We know that learners that struggle with maths often come from difficult background and don't actually necessarily see how maths fits into the broader sphere of life. and don't necessarily have role models to actually say, well, this person came from a similar background and yet went on to succeed in engineering or as a doctor or as a pharmacist or whatever it is. And so what we've done is we've profiled really inspirational South Africans, international figures, but critically people that have had to overcome struggles and yet gone on to succeed. So I mean, this is an example of the first female fighter pilot growing up in rural KZN. And obviously some of the issues that she sort of faced in terms of gender, in terms of her own background and schooling, and yet she went on to really do amazing things. So hopefully it's feeding, kind of drip feeding a positive growth mindset for learners. So I finished that first concept, comparing common fractions, and then I would go on to the second one, determining equivalence of proper fractions. But you can see the yellow line is kind of guiding me onto that one, and that's because I've actually mastered it up to the end of grade 9 or level 9. So I don't need that content. I can actually move straight onto this one. And so each one of the threads results that you see over here will be personalized for each learner based off of the diagnostics that come out. So, so this is obviously what a learner would see. It's really important to know that there's also a teacher-facing component where you start to see the cohort that you're working with. And so that's why I'm going to show some of the participants from the group and just show what came out of that. And it's obviously, you know, they're kind of just testing and playing around with it as part of the process. This is going through a redesign in about a week's time. Actually, it's going to be relaunched and they're going to be added features, which I'll share in a moment as well. But to say that the first starting point is to say that every learner is individualized, and that actually I can go click on a learner and start to look at their individual results. So I can look at, you know, whether it's numbers or fractions or measurement or whatever it is. And then where there are gaps, I can actually go down and I can look at every single concept that a learner has worked through. And I can start to, Rosalind, just so you know your thing is on. Thank you. So you can start to understand where the gaps are as a teacher. But really crucially is that the great thing is because there's such differential need, it's not your job as a teacher to necessarily go and teach every learner everything they need. That's the role of the software. Your role is actually to support and guide and motivate and facilitate the process in essence. But you can see, you know how many learners have not completed assessments. So 7 haven't, 3 have. You can see the progress of that, and you can see what the initial results are as part of the process. So I want to show you an example of where this happens at scale. So we have a school in Cape Town that over the last 10 weeks have run more than 3,000 assessments in their school, which is really amazing. So it's Apex High, and this is part of the challenge that a teacher faces, that in grade 8, you have some learners that are even beyond grade 8, they're grade 9 level, which is fantastic. Those are grade 8, but look at the variation all the way down, and this is all in the same grade. You have some learners those are learners that are actually at grade 0 for numbers, grade 1, grade 2, and this is the problem that they face. And so if we go and click on any one of these learners, you can actually start to see across all 7 assessments where their struggles lie. Okay, and so it's really about giving opportunity for teachers to get a great insight into what learners know and what they don't know. So what I would like to show is a couple of extra features which are actually going to be added on very shortly, because I think it's useful to see. So this is what the new dashboard will look like. It's not showing. I'm going to have to just reshare my screen. There we go. So this is an example of what some of the dashboard will look like. What's also going to be added in is to be able to see per concept, where does my class or where does my grade lie. So this is some real data coming from a school, and so you're able to see that actually, you know, there's some massive sinkholes in terms of determining place value, where you have 35% of learners below grade 3 level, but these are grade 9 learners taking the assessment. You can see rounding numbers is a massive problem with more than 50% of these learners not yet at grade 3 level. And so you're able to then actually look at from, where does it look like from that perspective. Obviously, when you're going through the catch-up, you'll be able to monitor each learner's progress to see, this is what they've mastered so far. The yellow is what they've covered in terms of their catch-up for numbers, and the red is what they still have to cover. And so hopefully you'll be able to see learners progress through the catch-up over time. Then another issue that Takalani mentioned was the whole communication component and trying to juggle, I'm doing this app, but then I've got to go into my phone and then I've got to do something else. What we're doing is we're building in a chat function. If you can imagine WhatsApp being built into this platform, the teachers are able to interact with their learners. Learners can ask questions. We'll be able to, send screenshots to say, I don't understand this. That is actually being built in as well to aid the communication. So whether this is, I'm sitting in a computer lab with 30 learners and this is just an easier way to manage it, or whether it's actually we're doing remote learning and I need to keep tabs on them and be able to send them messages, this takes place through the app then as well. So I'll come to that in a moment. So these are some added features that are on. And for us, it's been really exciting because over the last 2 months, we've seen some really, really encouraging results come through. And I want to just show you what those look like, and then I'm going to hand back over to Tracy. So this is actually one of my colleague, Alex. This is her daughter. So we got to know Alex actually through her daughter using reflective learning. And in essence, these are her term marks that she's generously supplied to us. So you can see, from term 2, term 3, term 4 last year in terms of grade 6, and how her school marks actually progressed. After the first term in grade 7, she's joined reflective learning and has worked through it and caught up many, many concepts, of which you can see some are down over there. And in the space of that short space of time, her school-based percentage mark has actually increased by, I think, 17 or 18%, something like that.
Her last formal test at school was 78, and she hasn't received a mark like that in many years.
So we're really encouraged to say that actually these foundational concepts lead to grade level improvements as well, which is a really important part. And so then the last thing that I would like to show you, which is for us really, really incredible, is to say, what does this look like over the course of the catch-up over a cohort of learners. And so we've been working with a school in Mitchell's Plain that took the assessment probably about, it's about 10, 11 weeks ago. And over the course of these last 10 or 11 weeks, have been spending about 30 minutes a day on reflective learning in their regular school day. So it's very structured, it's built into everything. And so this is what we've seen. And this is, for us, just really incredibly exciting. So the yellow of what you're seeing is learners, their initial assessment. So you can see this learner for numbers was at a grade 5 level. The green of what you're seeing above is their improvement in the last 10 or 11 weeks. So this learner has caught up 4 years worth of numbers in the space of these 10 or 11 weeks. Other learners you can see have caught up even more. And you can see across numbers, across fractions, measurements, data literacy. And for us, this nice square top is actually what we're aiming for. We're aiming to get every learner up to that grade 9 level ultimately. And so, I mean, I must commend the school, because the school's done a tremendous job in implementing this and guiding and supporting learners. And that's crucial, because the partnership role, we can provide a resource, but it really does depend on people using it effectively within their environment. But to say that, at the start, you can see just how many gaps there were for numbers. And now in this class, there are only 4 learners that are not yet at grade 9 level for numbers is incredible. And you can see just how much more progress that they've made. The really interesting thing for us, and this is a new learning in the last few weeks, is that you have some learners, if you look at this one, for instance, for fraction, has jumped from a grade 2 level up to grade 9 level in the very first run through of their assessment, their reassessment. So they were grade 2, went through the catch up, and on their first reassessment, they actually got up to grade 9 level. Now, in our process, if a learner doesn't reach the level that they need to, or they just have gaps and they still want to go back, they can loop around and go back through the process again, and then actually be reassessed again. And so you can see something like this, the different shades of color show the different reassessments. So this learner has gone from grade 2 to grade 9, but has actually gone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times the content, because they're slowly picking it up and have had to persevere in terms of applying themselves. And so this is really interesting. Some learners just get it first time, and other learners actually need to persevere. And for us, that's actually really positive, because it means that if learners do persevere, they will get it eventually, which is really, really exciting. So this is sort of an insight into what we've put together. It's been years of development and thinking and planning and research. And so we're really excited to see these sort of results. And the hope is, with this school that we're now working with in Mitchell's Plain, if they implement even half as well as that this other group did, hopefully what we'll see is this starts to bubble up to that grade 9 level then as well. And then, that becomes a really fantastic point of evidence to say that backlogs can be caught up and quickly, and this is something that can assist with that. So I'm going to hand back over to Tracy now, and then I'll drop my details at the end if you'd like to connect.
Thank you, Eugene, and I'm sorry, I didn't realize that your input was going to be as long. I would have gotten a bio from you too, but please, if you would give us that bio that we can put into the record of the meeting. And Alex, since you're part of the team, I think you should do it as well. Thanks very much. Tracy, sorry, Alex?
Sorry, yeah, I was just saying I will send you a little bio.
Okay, thank you. Tracy, can we just organize our time? We've got until 12 o'clock, we've got 40 minutes left, and I see 1 or 2 questions have come up already. How much longer do you need to present?
I probably only need about 15 minutes.
Would you like to take some questions now or only at the end?
I think that it would be a good idea really to just present the theory behind, which, what Eugene's demonstrated, really just to give the intention behind it all. So I'm really hoping this time around I'm going to be able to share my screen much more efficiently.
All right. So should we say that we aim for about 10 more minutes from you, and then about half an hour for questions?
That sounds good. I'll see if I can get it done in 10 more minutes.
Direct the questions to Alex or Eugene, or take them yourself.
Absolutely.
Whoever would like to. Okay.
So I'm just going to actually skip through, because what's happened. Please tell me I haven't got this right. Hang on a bit. Sorry. There we go. So Eugene's really shown you how we have scaled my original L4E intervention through the online diagnostics, providing the instant results, and then those cohort analytics, and probably the most valuable part of it is that customized catch-up based on what each learner actually needs. And he showed you some great improvements. So I want to really talk about what the secret ingredient is. And that was the big learning that I had. In fact, I was so overwhelmed by the success of those L4E learners. All those years later, I have actually managed to keep contact with them even now, as they're working as maths teachers, many of them, and I'm in touch with them all. And my learning has been a slow process, actually, just seeing how successful they have been. And in 2015, after they had done so well in that first year of university, I actually signed up to do my master's through WITS, a retrospective study really of what had happened, to see what learning I could take forward with me. And the critical thing that I found was this metacognition. And just to define it, that it's the awareness and the understanding of one's own thinking and learning, importantly, in order to evaluate one's cognitive strategies to expand our knowledge and extend our abilities. And it was through looking back and analyzing all the data. I literally had weekly data in the period that I worked with the learners. I was able to distill the practices that built their metacognitive skills, and through that formulate what I've called a metacognitive model that can be replicated. And so there are 5 parts to that metacognitive approach, and I'm just going to talk briefly to each of those parts. So the first part is actually taking or using a cognitive constructivist framework. And critical in that is really the realization that just because we teach it doesn't mean that they learn it. And I think that's something as teachers we don't always recognize. I work with lots of teachers who say, oh, I don't know why they can't do this. I've taught it so many times. And that misconception that actually the learning is theirs. And they don't always learn actually what we intend for them to learn. Actually, they construct their own knowledge based on their existing knowledge and their earlier experiences. And we can use that actually to engage them, because you know, teenagers, they have this individual nature of all human beings. Extending that to our knowledge construction holds appeal for youngsters. They all want to do quizzes and activities that tell them things about themselves. So we can leverage that actually to engage them in interest in the uniqueness of their own learning process. And in doing that, we can draw their attention into really their own thinking, their own learning, the way that they learn is different to other people, and where their strengths and weaknesses are. There's so much evidence from neuroscience that is in the popular texts at the moment that we can draw on, that give scientific support for the value of productive struggle, error analysis, mindset for learning. So we can draw from that to engage learners in their learning process. Secondly, a key part of developing metacognition is providing these visual learning pathways, which I call conceptual threads. You know, the nature of our curriculum design is following a spiral design, although it's not really very evident when you look at it. And actually that spiral design that comes out of Jerome Bruner's work underpins most modern curricula, Cambridge curriculum, the Common Core in the US, the Montessori curriculum. And that is based on building a basic understanding of fundamental concepts that you then revisit in this kind of cyclic way with progressive grades to develop understanding. The problem is that it's dependent on that initial solid foundation, and that's where we are actually struggling. If you rather use a strand design or a conceptual thread design, then what you're doing is you're actually outlaying the landscape of what you're learning. So learners can actually see, well, these are all the important concepts in maths, and by giving it this, this thread structure, they can also see the dependencies. Oh, I can't do this because actually it's built on this concept, and this is a concept that I'm struggling with. So you'll be familiar, having seen what Eugene showed, that we use these concentric circles to actually convey learners' results. The innermost circle shows their grade 3 result, the middle circle shows their grade 6 result, and the grade 9 result is shown in the outermost circle. And we use green that it's been mastered and red that it hasn't. And so just at a glance, you can see in this case, the learners mastered the 2 grade 3 level concepts, and they've mastered grade 6 level in these concepts here. And they haven't mastered grade 6 level there or there. These later concepts are ones that are introduced at later grades. And so that's why there's a single circle showing that it's assessed only at grade 9 level. But immediately you can see what it is that you know and what it is that you don't know. And you can see how far back the backlog tracks. This backlog is 6 years back if you're in grade 9. This is 6 years back. These are 3 years back. These are all 3 years back. So you can see that point of picking them up. And the important thing is that the learner sees it. The purpose of this visual learning pathway is to develop metacognitive skills in the learner. So the third component of the metacognitive approach is what I call transformative assessment. And you're probably very familiar with this wonderful quote by Dylan William, that all teaching really boils down to 3 key processes: finding out where the learners are in their learning, finding out where they're going, and finding out how to get there. And again, it speaks to that divide between teaching and learning. It's actually assessment that bridges the gap between what we teach and what they learn. But assessment has become an onerous task for many of us because of the demands that are made in terms of summative assessments. And so using assessment formatively, which is where its real value lies, has been something that it's difficult for busy teachers always to prioritize. The reason why I distinguish between formative assessment and transformative assessment is the life-changing component of it comes in with the engagement of the learner. So often assessment is something that the learners don't understand. They don't know what they're going to be tested on. They're not sure when they tested, what it means, what their mark means. They don't understand what it is they can do, what it is they can't do. They just know they haven't done very well, or they have. And so it's kind of tearing the veil off the assessment process and making it completely transparent and shared with the learner, the intention of it, the results of it, and most importantly, the analysis of those results and what it shows about their own learning, their own understanding. Let me see if I can find my, there we go. And so I think the critical thing that we've managed to achieve with the technology, which is really exciting because there isn't anybody else out there that has really done that, and that is to be able to customize the catch-up course in response to that transformative assessment. So through the technology, this is the part that I found the biggest challenge when I was conducting this as a face-to-face intervention, trying to catch up learners, was being able to provide each learner exactly with what they needed, to be able to pick them up at that place of last secure place of knowledge and take them forward. And I had to rely on sharing my my analyses with them for their self-analysis, to be able to hand that responsibility almost over to them. And what we're able to do through the technology, through the app, is to be able to provision them with exactly what it is that they need. And when you look at the range of abilities, as you saw in the class that Eugene demonstrated, and this is a different cohort of learners, and you can see again the range. The orange shows their baseline position. You can see the range in one class. These are grade 9 learners, and again the range is from grade 3, in this case not quite to grade 9, and so for a teacher to be able to meet those learning needs, it's a tall order. Just remember also that these scores are showing an overall maths result, and each of those scores is the result of performance on 81 different concepts. So technology gives us the opportunity to drill down to each of those 81 concepts and see where the learner's stuck, and pick them up again. And the last part of the approach, and this is really the focus of my own research, is that learners need to be metacognitively activated. And what I mean by that is, in my analysis of those original Alpha E learners, I saw, because I had this weekly data, I saw that each learner went through the same pattern of metacognitive skill development. And I went to the literature and found that this had been documented in the psychology literature by Dunning and Kruger. You might even have heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is a cognitive bias where when you don't know very much about something, you actually think you do. And Dunning and Kruger, they did their tests with university students, and they were mainly around general skills, not math skills. They noticed that when competency levels were low, confidence was high, and learners overestimated themselves. And my data showed that my learners all started out overestimating themselves by enormous amounts. And it was through taking them through guided self-analysis and self-prediction in the activities that we did in the classroom, that they were able to see that actually what they thought they knew was not what they actually knew. And through that process, they go through a point which I've called metacognitive activation, where suddenly the extent of what knowing that means makes sense to them. And the response initially is their confidence drops, and they start to underestimate themselves, because actually they realize what knowledge of that particular concept really means. And it's only after that realization that actually they can start to match their predicted performance to their actual performance as they grow to learn about themselves as a learner. And it's absolutely vital that learners go through this metacognitive activation point in order to progress. But as you can understand, you have to guide them through that and encourage them and nurture them through that, because that's quite, it could be quite damaging to one's self-confidence. And that's why we focus on these learning behaviors, to be able to affirm learners and highlight their strengths and guide them through the process of using their strengths to address their challenges. And then just to finish off with it, really, the most exciting thing that I am seeing in in my research so far, I'm just going to minimize this so that in case it's blocking what I'm trying to show, is that there's a positive correlation between learners' metacognitive levels and the speed and extent with which they can catch up backlogs in learning. And I love these two quotes. The one, Seymour Papert, is South African, who went to Harvard. The one really competitive skill is the skill of being able to learn. And learning is what most adults will do for a living in the 21st century. Alfred Perlman, the railway mogul. And as we sit in this information age now, where everything is changing and we have these stories told to us about fourth industrial revolution is upon us, and as teachers, how can we prepare our learners for jobs that don't even exist yet? Well, the one really competitive skill is the skill of being able to learn. If we can actually enable learners to actually become agents of their own learning, to understand themselves as learners and to drive their own learning progress, then we are actually preparing learners for that world. And actually, at the end of it, when you think about it, that is the core business of a teacher. Not to transfer information, but to actually develop an independent, self-sustaining, successful learner. And I'm still studying this relationship between metacognition and progress in learning. And I hope in the future I'll have more to be able to share about it. So thank you so much for the opportunity to show this much, and I'd love to hear if there are any questions.
Okay, and I'm sure there are going to be quite a few. Thank you, all of you, Tracy and Eugene and Alex. Tracy, if you would like to take the questions and then farm them out to your colleagues or take them yourself as it goes. I would just like to ask one question, and I think it's a stupid question because I think you might have covered it. But when you take the initial test, you administer the initial test and you use the examples of fractions, do you ever get the sense that maybe you haven't gone far back enough? Or does your test show you where the real problem started? I'm just a silly example, but I got to teach some grade 7s, which this term, for both of us, it was very lucky it was only 4 weeks, but I discovered things there that, I mean, had never occurred to me. How is it that people still in grade 7 take 1/2 plus 1/3 and get 2/5? And
yeah.
of course, I know that it still happens at grade 11 sometimes.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
What is going on there? Do your questions ask enough or give enough information on the thinking that gets to that point, or do you have to drill down, as you said just now?
Yeah, it's interesting, Peter, you use that as an example. I think that's fellow science teachers talking, because all my years, I always saw kids working out resistances in parallel and not being able to add fractions.
Yes.
And even though they were in grade 10 and grade 11. And yeah, it's you know, I think that the concept of a fraction and the concept of adding fractions, they don't get right at the beginning. And our test is able to show exactly where those problems are. I didn't use the example this time that I used last time, but you know, we're giving detailed feedback. So in terms of adding fractions, we can see, can a learner add fractions when the denominators are exactly the same? Like fractions, so we go back that far. Can they add fractions when the denominators are not the same, but one is a multiple of the other? Can they add fractions where the two denominators are they're unlike, and there's not a common multiple. They have to find a lowest common denominator or a highest common multiple for those denominators. And so through that distinction of those progressive conceptual development stages, just in adding fractions, we can see exactly where the problem is. And then we can drill back in the catch-up to pick them up at that point.
Okay, thank you. All right, folks, I'm not going to monopolize it, I promise you, but what questions have you got? This is what the Americans call wait time. The average wait time of a teacher before they answer their own questions is 7 seconds. So we're gonna hang about a bit here.
I see Tandi's asked about teachers meeting learning needs of individual learners, and you know, I think that is the real challenge. You know, the more we actually look at the data that we are gathering, the more we realize that the expectation of teachers to be able to do that is impossible. You know, when you're measuring across 81 concepts for a cohort of maybe 200 learners, the unique combination of learning gaps, it's not possible for a teacher to address that on their own. And in my face-to-face intervention, I tried to include the learners in that knowledge so that they could actually own those gaps and focus on catching up those gaps. But I had only 50 learners, and you know, how do you do it at scale? Because if you want to make a difference, you have to actually be able to achieve it at scale. And so that's where the tool is just able to be delivering greater and greater value, because actually that process is done through the technology, which is amazing as a non-technology person.
All right, any more questions before I try and ask another one myself? I'd rather not.
Peter, there are some questions in the chat box.
Going on, Benta.
There are some questions in the chat box, if you can please check.
Let me see. Oh, thank you. Yes, yes. Better remind me. Let's see. We'll go back. How do I get back in the chat box? All right. Let's try and talk. Is it correct to assume that this learning tool is dependent on access to digital equipment? Does it work offline as well, or also requires internet access?
Alex,
so
you want to pick it up? Yeah.
Maybe I'll pick up that question.
Sure, thanks, Eugene.
Yeah, so you can obviously see the response in the chat bar, but I'll kind of speak to it as well. So it does require a smart device of any kind, so a cell phone, a tablet, a laptop, a computer, anything like that, just because of the complexity of the assessment and obviously the automated marking process of it. So as I said, you know, Tracy's original intervention, she did it by hand, and it took hours and hours and hours. And that's, again, an unrealistic sort of expectation of teachers. So we have obviously tried to keep it as data light as possible, so that hopefully that doesn't become an issue. And then, I mean, maybe just to answer the next question that's sitting just below that, and that's which grades do we focus on? We typically focus between grades 6 and 11, partially because there's that kind of independent learning process, and so a slightly older learner we've found works best. We do have an assessment that actually can work with grade 3 and 4 learners, but we just found from the catch-up perspective, it actually requires obviously more in-depth work, you know, interpersonal work with a learner, and so it hasn't worked as well at those sort of younger ages. But you know, I suppose the two places we focus on, we say to primary school teachers, you know, let's make sure that all the gaps are caught up before learners head to high school. And for high school teachers, being able to say, you know what, obviously you're drawing from a range of primary schools, from different backgrounds and everything. Let's start with your grade 8s and make sure by the time they make a critical subject choice at the end of grade 9, that they have actually caught up everything that they need to, that they can effectively choose core maths and not default to maths literacy. So that's kind of the two answers to those questions.
And can I make a comment to Chris? You know, without the technology, I think the big learning for me always really is this value around metacognition. And with metacognition, it requires transparency in our engagement with them, that as teachers, we need to actually be sharing with them you know, what it is we're learning, why we're learning it, how we're learning it, getting them to analyze how they think they would do if they were to be tested on it before they do a test, getting their results back, sharing it with them, sharing whatever insights you actually form in your head around their learning with them, so that it's something that can grow their understanding as themselves as learners. So yeah, the metacognitive approach can be used in the classroom in any kind of activity, actually, because it's just around sharing your insight as a teacher with them as learners. Don't use it just to direct your teaching, use it to empower them to direct their learning.
Okay, this question from Tio, it could be a huge answer, so let's just give it a short one and admit that it could be more extensive. The learner that has a learning grade 3 learning level and is actually in grade 7, what do you actually do to get there? What's the nature of the process to remediate it?
I think maybe, yeah, so I mean, I think I sort of tried the shortest answer I could in response to that, but mostly just to say that the entire system is built assuming that learners are not where they need to be. So the entire system is built to say, well, let us take you from wherever you're at for each individual learner. So whether it be grade 0 for some, or just maybe a year back, or maybe you are at grade level but still have a couple of gaps that need filling. So wherever each learner is at, it then gives them the catch-up, personalized learning journey that they need as an individual to slowly work them up from potentially the first phase of grade 1 to 3, and work them all the way up until we have confirmed understanding through the reassessments at the grade level that they are expected to be. And so, yeah, I mean, we constantly, and I think that's also what Tracy was saying around the bridging, you know, assessment being the bridge between the teacher and the learner, that it is just based on this constant reassessment of us checking, right, what do you know and what do you not know? Let's see if we can plug in those gaps. Now let's assess again. What do you now know and what gaps still remain? And then let's assess again until we've assessed to a point where we have confirmed that the learner knows what they need to know in terms of those foundations.
In other words, real remedial education.
Correct.
Yeah. And maybe just to quickly add on from a practical perspective in terms of how it works, some schools integrated into their timetable and say, you know, we're going to take our computer period and we're going to make, you know, 1 period a week where we're going to work on reflective learning to catch up backlogs whilst the regular curriculum goes on, because it can't necessarily be forced. And then some might say, well, actually, you know what, we're going to focus on a very specific group of learners and make it an afternoon club. And so those are the two main ways that the teachers work with it. And in essence, again, the role of the teacher is not necessarily to teach everything, but to be the facilitator of it, because it is just so difficult to meet the need of every individual learner.
Okay, now let's see here. We've got a question. Is the reflective learning tool a learner management system, and is it already available to all? What are the costs? Ah, yes. Filthy Luca. It raises its head. What does one do to get hold of this material, and can you buy it, and how is it made available, or is it to the wider public?
Yeah, so I mean, I think maybe to answer the first question, is reflective learning a learner management system? It's not I mean, it operates in a similar way, but it's not typically a learner management system. So it's not going to manage all your other components of working with learners. And there are costs involved because, you know, obviously it's taken a lot of research and development to put it into practice thus far. But one thing that we definitely do is that we look at the background of the school or the organization, and we take that into consideration. And obviously, if there are more learners, you know, it gets cheaper on scale. So what I'm going to do, and just at the end of this, I'm going to drop my details. And if you want to find out more specifically, you know, how it could fit into your context and what the cost might be or whatever it is, then you just click on the link and you can book an appointment with me. But I promise you, we've tried to make it as cost effective as possible, because the aim is not that those who can afford it get this. The aim is that everybody can get this, because it's really needed across the board. Yeah, so hopefully that answers. And
that. Bridge, of course, will forego its commission.
One thing I would also like to say, just quickly, is that in the next couple of weeks, we're actually going to be releasing a teacher development course, a free teacher development course that goes into more detail around backlogs, diagnostic assessment, and that's something that we want to actually make available, because we feel like there's a big lack of knowledge around backlogs being the major problem in maths. And so we want to be able to open it up. So that will come available. And again, I'm going to drop a link at the end to say, if you want to sign up for that, when it gets released, we'll be able to send you a mail. And then you can actually go through that with you and your team or whoever it is.
Okay. Are you going to do it as an online course?
Yeah, it'll be an online, on-demand. So it's video material, in essence, for you to go through.
All right. Well, we can usually rely on Philip to ask the awkward questions, but if you see the question here, you've partly answered it already. I think the short answer to the last part of the question is, what are university departments doing? Nothing?
So I think our interactions with universities have been quite interesting as well, because they recognize that a gap in particularly their first years coming into teacher training actually exists even for those students that they're working with. So there's actually two parts. One, some of those students need to be caught up in terms of their ability. And so we are speaking with both UCT and Stellenbosch to see how do we fit in and actually provide remedial for even at that level. And then the other component is, you know, what are they doing to actually be trained and educated to deal with this? And in many ways, I think that's part of where we see our role as reflective learning, is to try to actually get to those sort of places and be able to share and help learners. So that teacher course is kind of one of the ways that we try to do that as well.
I'd like to ask a meta question about metacognition here. In your experience working with kids, and you working with mathematics and trying to get them into this metacognitive style, have you found at all, do you have any inkling or possibly even evidence that when kids learn to do this in maths, it spills over into other subjects and other areas of learning? Have you got evidence of that?
We don't have evidence of that ourselves, Peter, but that is the critical question, really, because you know, that's what we're striving for, actually, through creating these metacognitive learners, that actually we empower them in all spheres, no matter what direction they choose to go in as a learner. So yeah, maths is the sort of vehicle, really, just for the development of the metacognitive skills. And I guess I saw there was a question about do we have it for other subjects, and I had actually developed similar science diagnostics with the original maths diagnostics, and our intention is to actually have this available for science too, but actually it applies to any learning endeavor in anything, you know, is that actually if you're empowered to understand the scope of what has to be learned, and to be able to assess and see what it is that you already know, what it is that you don't know, and what you are expected to know, then you're able to plot a path through to, you know, draw on whatever resources and strategies you might need to get yourself there. And it's that is the principle really of everything that we're trying to do here. And so my expectation would be, yes, that it is transferable. And, you know, to some extent, those L4E learners and their continuing success is evidence of that, because, you know, they have gone into very different fields. I know I mentioned how many had gone into education, and particularly maths education, because I'm so proud of that. But the reality is that they're working in all different kinds of endeavors, and they are extraordinarily successful in comparison to the environment, others in the environment that they've come out of. So I believe that, and that's what drives me forward with this, but I don't have the concrete evidence of it yet, but maybe I will before too long.
Yeah, you need to look for it. Well, if you remember, those of us who are old enough will remember the experiment with OBE, and one of the critical outcomes there was teaching people to be better learners. And, you know, this is probably hidden within that fairly bland and broad statement. Look, if there are any other questions, I think that we do have a 12 o'clock time limit. I think those questions have to be addressed to you, possibly via bridge. But are there any other sort of final comments that you would like to make? Apart from saying thanks for listening, but any final bit of wisdom you'd like to leave us with? Any of our presenters?
Peter?
Yes, Benta.
Gonna look to Benta
Craig,
for it.
I think Craig has his hand up.
Craig has his hand up.
I did have my hand up, but then I took it down. But now that I've been spotted, I better say what I was going to say. Tracy, you know what's interesting for me, if we go back to your L4E learners, is that, and you talked about this right in the beginning, those were learners who were selected for that program right in the beginning were selected because the teachers had identified them as high performers, even though their performance was really, really poor.
And hard workers. I guess maybe hard workers counted more.
Yes. Yeah. And I think what's fascinating for me all these years down the line is that those learners have proven their teachers correct. So even though your maths diagnosis of them right in the beginning was that these kids really don't know very much maths, their commitment to work then up to grade 12 and beyond has shown that they demonstrated something very special even at the age of grade 9. And I think we need to bear in mind that these are special kids. These are not your average, unfortunately, learners. So even though their performance wasn't great in the beginning, they had something. And hopefully that's going to come out in the learners that I think you said 12 of them are teaching now. So I just thought it's worth mentioning. It's really exciting to see that.
It is, but I must just temper that to say that, you know, 2 of those learners hadn't actually passed maths in grade 9. So they really were low performing learners. The one school had only 1 out of 90 kids who had passed grade 9 maths. And so selecting 5 learners to come to this course was actually a real challenge. So I'm not sure that those kids are as unusual as we might think. I mean, the one child that I always, he's a constant reminder for me in everything that I'm doing is one of the learners who was shown on the slide, Mankoba. On my original diagnostic, he was really in the middle of the group. He was a poor performer. He got 25% on the actual baseline test. His grade level was only around grade 5. And he's the kind of learner that might not have been selected for an enrichment course or an opportunity for a Saturday school. He wasn't a performer, and he turned out to be the highest performer of all of the learners. He actually made a 68% improvement between his baseline assessment and his summative assessment within a year. And for him, it just came together. And I think there are lots and lots of Mankobas out there. I think there are loads of kids who just need a little bit of reconnecting of what they know and what they've got to be able to empower themselves to find a path to success. Yeah.
I'm going to sort of wind this up now, but I'm going to add something that I feel fairly strongly about, especially while we talk about online education. And the one thing that happens in online education, of course, is you take the immediacy out of that interaction between teachers and learners. And not only that, but all of those extramural things that one does at school to get to know the kids. The fact that the teachers did identify these people was not an accident. In some way, they got to know their kids. And if you know the kids, you could probably guess better as to what the motivation and the ability to work hard is like. And that's something that our online thing almost breeds out of the equation. But knowing kids and having that direct contact with some is absolutely essential, and it's indispensable in decent education, I think. And I always then go back to Arthur C. Clarke, who says any teacher who can be replaced by a machine should be. Yep.
And Peter,
Anyway.
I mean, I just want to take that just one step further and say that just as we as teachers know the learners need to know themselves as learners. That's how we truly empower them. So share everything you can with them that you know about their learning, that you can see in your professional opinion, so that they are equipped with that information to make their learning journey and ultimately take over their learning journey from you and be successful. Sorry to put my little 5 cents worth in again.
Okay, you have that prerogative. Folks, I think we're going to wind up there. We've gone to 12:05. We've stolen 5 minutes. Thank you very much for being with us. You will, I have no doubt, we'll be enjoying your company again next year. I'm not sure if it's going to be face-to-face. We'd obviously like to get back to that as soon as we can. But in the meantime, apart from thanking our presenters, thanking Bridge and especially Benta and the team from Bridge for helping put this on and for organizing everything. Please stay safe, and I mean not just talking about on the roads. We're also, as teachers, I think, got to try and spread the message about how to stay safe, because we see countries that allowed their guards to drop, and they're suffering the consequences now. And we don't want to have a post-summer peak that messes up another year of education. So be safe, be well, and thank you very much for being with us, and thank you so much to the presenters, Tracy, Eugene, Alex, and Takalani. All the best, everybody.
Thank you,
Bye.
Thank you.